Hello, and welcome to Meno Ministries Church of the Nazarene Wednesday night Bible study. I'm Tina Cattane, and I'm teaching the Bible study. And this week's study is on the Table of Showbread. We're talking about Christ in the Old Testament, and we've been talking about the tabernacle for a few weeks now. And right now, we're covering the furniture in the holy place, in which the most holy place is. So, um, let's get started with a few verses that cover our subject. So the first reading that we're going to do is Exodus chapter 25, verses 23 through 30. And these are the instructions that God gave Moses for making the table. He says, also make around it a rim a handbreadth wide, and put a gold molding on the rim, and put 4 gold rings for the table, and fasten them to the 4 corners where the 4 legs are. The rings are to be close to the rim to hold the poles used in carrying the table. Make the poles of acacia wood, overlay them with gold, and carry the table with them, and make its plates and dishes of pure gold, as well as its pitchers and bowls for the pouring out of the offerings. And put the bread in the presence on this table to be before me at all times. And then in Leviticus 24, verses 6 through 9, it says, arrange them in 2 stacks. So he's talking about the bread now. 6 in each stack. So they were supposed to make 12 loaves of unleavened bread. He says, arrange them in 2 stacks, 6 in each stack, on the table of pure gold before the Lord. By each stack, put some pure incense as a memorial portion to represent the bread and to be a food offering presented to the Lord. This bread is to be set out before the Lord regularly, Sabbath after Sabbath, on behalf of the Israelites as a lasting covenant. It belongs to Aaron and his sons, who are to eat it in the sanctuary area, because it is the most holy part of their perpetual share of the food offerings presented to the Lord. And then in John, the Gospel of John, chapter 6, Jesus said, for my flesh is real food and my blood is real drink. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me and I in them. Just as the living Father has sent me and I live because of the Father, so the one who feeds on me will live because of me. So this was to be a continual sacrifice and a representation of the covenant that God made with Israel. So the 12 loaves, which represented each of the 12 tribes of Israel, of unleavened, because yeast represents sin, bread sat on the table from Sabbath to Sabbath. It was changed each Sabbath. They would get 12 new loaves. It represented a perpetual offering to the Lord by which the Israelites declared that they consecrated to God the fruits of their labors, and by which the nation at the same time acknowledged that all such fruit was provided by God's blessing. So everything they had was provided by the blessings of God, and they consecrated the first fruits to God by making this bread and keeping it perpetually on the altar. And when the bread was replaced on each Sabbath, it became food for the priests, but they had to eat it in the sanctuary because it was holy. So the bread of the presence. Now, there we see a lot of instances of bread being mentioned in the Bible, but specifically the manna in the wilderness. When God provided manna every day, he provided just enough that the Israelites needed and no more. And if they tried to keep leftovers, it would spoil. It wouldn't stay good. So they had to rely on God every day for their provision for that day, except the night before the Sabbath. They would get double that day, and they could save manna for the Sabbath so that they weren't going out to gather manna on the Sabbath. So just like the manna in the wilderness, the bread of the presence was designed to show that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. And this comes from Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3. And I'm just going to go there real quick and give you the context of that. Deuteronomy 8. Um, it says here, he's talking about, I'm going to start in verse 1. It says, "You must carefully follow every commandment I am giving you today, so that you may live humbly, that you may live and multiply, and enter and possess the land that the Lord swore to give your fathers. Remember that these 40 years the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness, so that he might humble you and test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commandments. He humbled you, and in your hunger he gave you manna to eat, which neither you nor your fathers had known, so that you might understand that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord." So that is the context of that when God said that to them. And also, Jesus said this to Satan when he was being tempted in the desert. He was hungry. He'd been fasting for 40 days. And Satan came and tempted him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these bread stones to turn into bread." And Jesus said, "It is written, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." And so in the Lord's Supper, um, bread was given to us as a perpetual symbol for Christ's provision and for his people's need. So he said, "Take this bread and eat of it. It is my body, which will be broken for you." So that it became a symbol of Christ's broken body, where he provided for our salvation. He provided the sacrifice that was needed for our forgiveness of sins, our atonement for sin. Just as manna provided for the Israelites' hunger in the desert. And Jesus claimed this symbol for himself in John 6. And let me just go there real quick. And I'm going to read it to you. John 6, 26 through 58. Where Jesus said, "Truly, truly, I tell you, it is not because you saw these signs that you are looking for me, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill." So he had just fed the 5,000. And he's saying this to the crowd that has just eaten the bread that was provided. Do not work your food for food that perishes, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For on him God the Father has placed his seal of approval. Then they inquired, "What must we do to perform the works of God?" And Jesus replied, "The work of God is this, to believe in the one he has sent." So they asked him, "What sign then will you perform, so that we may see it and believe you? What will you do? Our fathers ate manna in the wilderness, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat." Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I tell you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." "Sir," they said, "give us this bread at all times." And Jesus answered, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never hunger, and whoever believes in me will never thirst. But as I stated, you have seen me, and still you do not believe. Everyone the Father gives me will come to me, and the one who comes to me I will never drive away. For I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but to do the will of him who sent me. And this is the will of him who sent me, that I shall lose none of those he has given me, but raise them up at the last day. For it is my Father's will that everyone who looks to the Son and believes in him shall have eternal life, and I will raise him up on that last day." At this, the Jews began to grumble about Jesus because he said, "I am the bread that came down from heaven." They were asking, "Is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How then can he say, 'I have come down from heaven'?" "Stop grumbling among yourselves," Jesus replied. "No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will raise him up at the last day. It is written in the prophets, and they will all be taught by God. Everyone who has heard the Father and learned from him comes to me. Not that anyone who has seen the Father, except the one who is from God, only he has seen the Father." Truly, truly, I tell you, he who believes has eternal life. I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness, yet they died. This is the bread that comes down from heaven, so that anyone may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And this bread, which I will give for the life of the world, is my flesh. At this, the Jews began to argue among themselves, how can this man give us his flesh to eat? So Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I tell you, unless you eat the flesh and drink the blood of the Son of Man, you have no life in you. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day. For my flesh is real food, and my blood is real drink. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me, and I in him. Just as the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so also the one who feeds on me will live because of me. This is the bread that came down from heaven, unlike your fathers who ate the manna and died. The one who eats this bread will live forever. So that was kind of a long passage, but it was important to read the whole thing because Jesus is very clearly connecting himself with the manna that came down from heaven, calling himself the bread that comes down from heaven. And then we have this table of the bread of the presence. And God called it that in our first reading for today. He said, put the bread of the presence on the table. And it's representative of the presence of God. And over again, Jesus said, if you eat of my body and drink of my blood, I will remain with you and you will remain with me. And this is our word, Meno, that is the name of our ministry, Meno Ministries. It's a Greek word for abide or remain. And it's what we talk about all the time. It's the interconnected relationship that we have with Jesus, where his presence indwells us and lives through us. And so this is a really important symbol of Jesus Christ. He is the bread of life, as it says on the thing. So the incense, he told them to burn incense as a memorial portion. The memorial portion was meant to remind the worshiper that all good things come from the Lord, and or cause the Lord to remember and bless the offerer in covenant faithfulness. So there's this covenant between God and his people, and they remember when the incense is burned that God, all good things come from the Lord, and the Lord remembers the promises that he made as part of that covenant to the person offering. So the incense was a symbol of acceptance of that covenant on both parts. God accepts Christ's work on our behalf. So Christ's death and resurrection, God accepts that offering on our behalf. And when we take communion and we eat of his body and drink of his blood, we accept the offering that Christ made on our behalf. So I hope that makes sense. The memorial portion represented the covenant agreement. The person offering the incense remembers that all good things come from the Lord. The Lord has provided all good things, and the Lord remembers his promises to provide. And then Christ came and he gave of him, he died and was rose again on our behalf. We accept that sacrifice when we eat of the bread, and God accepts us because of Christ's work when we remain in him and he in us. So the table itself, its only purpose was to exhibit the bread. It had no other purpose. Its job was simple: to show the bread. It wasn't about the table. It was about the bread on the table. So if our ministry, whether it's witnessing to a friend or preaching a sermon to a mega church on a Sunday morning, if it puts the spotlight on anything but Christ himself, we have failed. We hold up Christ himself to the world to be glorified. And for the good of those who will see him. So my final word about the bread, and I hope that I've explained this. I feel like it's really clear, but at the same time, I want to make sure that everybody's understood that the connection between the bread and Jesus Christ is very direct, and it seems very simple, but it's also deep. So if you have any questions, if you didn't understand anything about this, get a hold of me and we'll talk about it. And I want to make sure that you get this because it's really important. So don't go hungry. Are you living on the bread of God? Are you starving spiritually? So living on the bread of God is not just about taking communion, it is about living in communion with Jesus Christ in the abiding relationship. He in us and us in him. So there's plentiful bread available in the house of God. So come, eat, and live. And that's what I have for you today. Sunday morning at 11, as usual, we have our sermon streaming on both Facebook and YouTube. And we have the gathering at our house here on Sunday nights at 6 p.m. for those who live near Genesee County, Michigan. And then I will be back next Sunday where we will talk about the altar of incense. So until then, you have a blessed week. Bye now.